have to mute camera.
I muted, but
okay. Well, it's about a minute past noon. I think we should probably get started. I know that we have a number of the EMR team on the line, so whoever's got host duties at the moment, please just make sure to mute incoming participants so everybody can have their microphones quieted. And if you can. Oh, I think I just got muted myself there for a moment. So if so, anyone who's just joining us, just make sure that your microphone is muted during the presentation, and that'll prevent the background noise. So I'm just going to introduce this session. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the SMA EMR team's digital health checkup webinar series. So this is an ongoing webinar series that it's going to take place every month, and every time we will have an expert presenter discussing an aspect of healthcare in the digital realm. I'm Andrew Strang. I'm a team lead with the SMA EMR team, and I'm going to introduce our presenters, and then at the end, I'll help facilitate any questions you might want to ask. There's going to be a Q&A at the end, and if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, you can enter them into the chat. The chat function is at the lower right of your screen, and when you open that chat box, you'll see at the very bottom of the chat box where you can enter a question. I'd also like to remind everyone again that muting your microphones is an ability that you have by hovering over your screen. You'll have the microphone icon that you can click on to mute yourself or unmute yourself if you'd like to speak. So I'll get started with the introductions. We have with us Leanne Kennedy. She is the Director of Practice Management with Sagis, a subsidiary of the CMPA. She is responsible for the planning and direction of practice management solutions that optimize efficiency and reduce risk for healthcare professionals, clinics, and institutions. We also have Cindy Elliott. She's the Program Lead of Practice Management with Sagis, and she's responsible for support, logistics, and implementation of solutions for team-based healthcare practices, including the cybersecurity offering. We also have Aaron Foyer, and he is a cybersecurity and technology consultant with over 20 years of experience and is a partner with Sagis. Aaron's domain expertise is in healthcare, public sector, critical infrastructure, and cities. He's worked with over 20 Canadian cities, ministries, agencies, and departments to protect Canada's critical information and infrastructure. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Leanne.
There, I think I have unmuted myself.
Yes, yeah.
All righty. Thank you, Andrew. It's great to be here with everybody. I am from Sagis, and really looking forward to talking with you all today about the current cybersecurity situation and as it relates to healthcare. Over the past number of years, this has become an incredibly important topic, and even more so this year with the COVID crisis. As the evidence would suggest, in healthcare, we have very little preparation in terms of managing this situation. So over the next hour, we'll take a look at the situation, what steps we can take to protect our patients, ourselves, and then we're going to follow up, as Andrew said, with a Q&A going forward. So I see Cindy is on the next slide. We're sort of doing a tag team here. Just touching base on Sagis a little bit, which is our organization. They are a part of the CMPA family, and we've been developed to help provide programs and services that not only serve physicians, but also your teams, you know, the broader healthcare team that works together so that we can help support safety and quality as we deliver care. We have 3 streams: practice management, as you know, Andrew mentioned, I'm the director of that, and we're currently focusing on cybersecurity and privacy risks. We also have the Sagis Safety Institute, who developed some amazing programs around culture, communication, team dynamics. And then, of course, we have a high-risk specialty. Their focus right now is on making the OR a safer place. So there we go, Cindy, for the next slide. So just for our objectives today, I'm going to really want to give a current snapshot of what's happening in the cybersecurity space in healthcare, and take a look at how cyber criminals are actually trying to attack the healthcare space. I'll share some cyber safe habits. Actually, Cindy will. At the end, we'll do a really good wrap up, some takeaways for you to have. We'll take a look at Sageshield, which is a new cybersecurity platform we've developed specifically to address these needs. And then we're going to have our Q&A, where Aaron is going to be available, as will Cindy and I, to answer some of the questions that you may have brought with you, or that you might think about as you go along. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with the chat box, but if you had questions, don't hesitate to pop them in now as we go through this. All right, next slide there. So it certainly is a changing environment. I don't need to tell any of you about that. Almost every day we're being impacted in new ways by technology. And in fact, most moments of the day, we actually are engaging technology, whether we're communicating with our teams, with our colleagues, pharmacists, consultants, with hospitals. It's just really become part of our everyday interaction. The other thing that's been changing with that technology is that patient medical data is now very portable, which is fabulous, accessible, flexible, and very convenient. The other thing that comes along with all of that flexibility of our EMRs, EHRs, our lab and test results is increased risk. And then we also have the conversation of virtual care, which for all of us this year has become a common situation. And it really doesn't look like it's probably going to leave, not just because of COVID, but because of the benefits it offers. With virtual care, there's new responsibilities, and there's penalties when those responsibilities are not met. So we're going to take a look at some of those aspects and how they are impacted by cyber criminals and the focus that they have. You may ask why that there's such a rush, I guess, from cyber criminals on the healthcare space. Well, it's really because PHI, patient health information, is growing in value, and it's growing in value significantly. It's not just famous patients that are attractive to breaches, which is something that we've all understood in the past. It's really a complete record of anyone that is of interest, which is why smaller clinics with less security and less training are actually so attractive to cyber criminals. The ability to gather data from an individual allows for a couple of things. Mainly, it's identity theft. You know, an individual who's got a full suite of data, that identity can be taken and used to open up mortgages, to take out loans, and it's really catastrophic to the individual that it occurs to. Sometimes it takes years to recover from that. Those healthcare files that are so valuable run about $1,000 or up to $1,000 on what we call the dark web, that underbelly of the World Wide Web. And if we compare that to an average credit card number value, it runs about $5. An entire identity without the components that are in a health identity runs about $30. So you can see the valuation of that being a real motivator for criminals. And as the risks with new technology are introduced, so does privacy legislation, and it has to. Just what I've just discussed. We need to protect our patients and their right to privacy. So that is, as that evolves, that also changes the game and changes the conversations we need to have around this. So Cindy, do you have the next one there? All righty. So who is at risk? Well, everybody is. Every province, every territory, every size clinic, large and small. We're all being attacked by cyber criminals. Whether those attacks are successful or not, I can guarantee to you that the onslaught is constant, sometimes by the thousands or hundreds of thousands in terms of where those attacks are being focused. Nobody is safe from attack. The black market is booming. Cyber criminals, they have no boundaries. So the fact that we are in the healthcare profession doesn't seem to bother them at all. According to Raheel Qureshi, he's a Canadian cybersecurity consultant. He said that the healthcare sector is now targeted more than any other industry in the country. And more attacks are leading to breaches. In fact, 48% of all the security breaches in Canada last year were in our healthcare sector. You would have heard of some of those breaches. The missing laptop that led to 600,000 patient records being stolen, and it was a subsequent $11 million class action lawsuit. There was also 7,000 patients whose privacy was breached when an insecure email was used to communicate PHI. It just gave an access point. So hospital systems and clinics, we do hear on the news occasionally when they're being shut down, when their files are encrypted with ransom. And the attacks are not decreasing at all. So in Canada, we actually have the Canadian Cybersecurity Centre. And in the last 12 months, they've developed a specific, I guess we'll call them task force, to focus on healthcare. And this is an actual image from the website where they are warning healthcare that they are under immediate threat of cyber attacks. Criminals are opportunists. When healthcare teams are busy, and that's our typical way to operate anyway, we add COVID on top of that, really changed the situation. In Saskatchewan, you know, there's been some breaches in the communities around you, and even something like the Humboldt, where the breaches were more privacy in nature, but it just shows how much media, how much pain, and also some of the consequences that come with that type of breach. Cyber criminals, they really are opportunists. They know no geography, and living in smaller communities or rural areas is really not a protection at all. So when we take a look at the current risk of cyber attacks on healthcare, we want to just really take a moment to maybe ask a quick question. Cindy, do you have the next slide for the poll? There we go. So we ask this question all the time when we're giving talks or engaging with physicians and their teams. We want to ask you the question because we're often surprised at how prevalent breaches are in small towns and cities. So this is an anonymous poll. Be completely honest. Have you ever experienced a cyber breach? You can just answer yes or no to the right of your screen. So Cindy, you let me know when you're complete with what the data you're receiving.
I'll just give you guys one more second and then we'll close the poll and share the results. Okay, so I'm going to share the results up on the screen as well. You should see the poll results appearing on your screen now.
Yeah. So about, it looks like 7 out of 20 have, and 8 of 20 have not, and 5 of us did not answer. I might be one of those, actually. So you can see that it's not a rare occurrence, you know, and some of the polls that we've done in the past had as much as 75% saying, yes, they had been breached before. All right, I'm just going to roll to the next slide there, Cindy. So this is a really powerful way to look at our current situation. Cybersecurity is not an IT issue. And many periods of time before, we actually thought it was, technology was new. We now know that it is actually a patient safety issue. And the reality is it's not a matter of if you will be breached, it's when you will be breached. So that's something just to really keep in the background as we move forward on some of the conversations that we're going to go over in the next couple of slides. The consequences of cybersecurity breaches are very significant. And that's a new slide, Cindy.
Sorry, and I'm just going to jump in there too. And I'd just like to invite everyone to take a moment and just think about that first sentence about cybersecurity is not just an IT issue, because we really do look at it in most of the different fields. We look at it as an IT issue, but when we bring it to the healthcare space, we have to take a new lens, and it really is that patient safety issue. So we think about some of the ransomware attacks that we have seen. The NHS in the UK is a big one that a lot of people may have followed. And again, it was a couple of years ago. So we're starting to really see what the results and the catastrophic impact of a breach like that, of that magnitude. But just even the idea of being ransomware and being locked out of your systems. And what about not being able to access those critical test results for your patients? Let's say it's your INR patients, you're trying to adjust their Coumadin and you no longer have access to those levels. You can't make a decision on where to go next with it because you don't have those critical test results. Or maybe you're going ahead with a procedure and you no longer have access to any of those files, so you can't go ahead with that procedure. What happens if your system's locked down in the middle of a procedure and you no longer have access? So it really needs to be looked at. We need to shift our way of thinking about this, that this isn't just IT, and it really is about patient safety.
Excellent. Alrighty, so Cindy's touched on some of the consequences, and I've got 3 categories here that we often speak to when we're engaging with clinicians and their teams. As Cindy mentioned, patient safety, files getting locked with ransomware, if you can't access records, medication lists, lab results for a few days or weeks. That doesn't have to go with any further description. We know it is a patient safety, let alone the identity theft, also a patient safety issue. Privacy breaches go hand in hand with cybersecurity breaches. Patient medical data is now very portable, as I mentioned, and it can be accessed from whatever institution we are doing their care from. Theft of PHI, files, identity, profound stress. And then, of course, there is a financial and legal picture here. It doesn't go with any surprise. When we look at some of the breaches like Life Labs, where there was so many million people from across Canada, in Saskatchewan, there was a significant amount themselves. And of those patients, I believe it was around 93,000. The cost to recover those per record was about $282. So that's a big picture, but in a small clinic, there's a cost to recover from a breach that is tied to the amount of patient files that you have that have been affected. There's also payment of ransom to access files that's going on quietly in many places around the country. It's a significant thing when you can't provide service or provide care anymore to patient population. Sometimes the theory goes that if we pay the ransom, we get back to our practice. And the other thing to consider in that space is that just because you've paid a ransom once doesn't mean that the criminals haven't planted another way to attack you for a future engagement. So these are just conversations that we need to have with cybersecurity experts in terms of how do we manage those types of situations. And then there's also investigation remediation costs, certainly in terms of those per records, but there's also the cost recovery in terms of the clinic operations. There's regulatory issues, when we have to speak to the regulatory standards and where perhaps we haven't kept our due diligence up, what type of consequences that would be there then.
Leanne, can I add a comment with regards to the consequences around breaches?
Yep. Perfect, Aaron. Thank you.
It's Aaron speaking, and I like these points, and it recalls to me that kind of the meta consequence around breaches, especially for clinicians and healthcare providers, is really around trust and reputational damage too. We can recover from a systems outage, we can restore our systems, but if you've lost the trust of patients and clients in your systems and in your ability to protect information, that can be very difficult to recover from. This is true for small and large. So we've seen this with hospitals and healthcare networks, but I think even a clinic or a group of clinics has that reputational and trust issue to deal with after a breach, and it's harder to restore that.
Oh, thanks for bringing that up, Aaron. That's a very significant component. So, Cindy, can you pop to the next slide? There we go. So, how do cyber criminals target healthcare? Well, first of all, there's a denial of service and malware attacks on critical infrastructure. And Aaron, I know, could speak quite handily to that. All of our healthcare operations depend on robust, critical infrastructures for all of our systems. They're vulnerable to natural disaster, human error, and cyber attacks. So those denial of service attacks were criminals would overload the network with attacks on the ports with a high volume of traffic that incapacitates it. There's, of course, malware, spyware, ransomware, and malicious code. All of these, we don't have to go into sort of a descriptor of that, about how catastrophic it would be, but it really is important to engage with cyber professionals, such as Aaron, where the strong commercial grade firewalls are there and kept up to date. They play a really big role, and they're more difficult to penetrate. Now, the cyber criminals often take a less time consuming and easier approach than hitting sort of those big structures. And that is when they target human vulnerabilities. And that would be, as Cindy's just popped up, that social engineering and phishing conversation. Now, I'm sure each of you has received at some point a fishy email. We're humans and we all have our humanness. This is a great image. It's the picture of a fishing hook, fishing for the key to unlock the kingdom. Cyber criminals have great success preying on human vulnerability. Phishing leverages social engineering, which is our emotional way of being, our desire to help, sometimes our fear, and they deliver highly effective attacks. A professional organization that you're a member of might be an email that comes in. Is it really from them? Asking you to click on a link or enter in sign-in information. We are all fallible, and we work in busy and very stressful environments in healthcare. And this is, by and large, the most efficient and lowest cost and easiest way to breach a clinic environment or a hospital environment. And when cyber criminals are successful and know what our logins are, like our combinations of our email and our login information, well, they're able to then launch a attack that's known as credential stuffing. And I'm sure some of you have heard about that in about 3 weeks ago, where we had a very significant breach at CRA, where they used credential stuffing. They took packages or combinations of passwords and they just kept stuffing them into the system until they found individuals who had reused password email combinations in other systems that had been breached to successfully gain access to their accounts. So it's very significant. And your clinic, your hospital, any type of healthcare organization will undergo that same kind of attack using reused passwords. Aaron, I don't know if you have anything to add on that. Yeah,
I do, because it's so topical. And you said the word, how are clinics targeted, and two things resonated with me. We as clinicians might be targeted directly, but the membership as a clinician, you're part of large associations, you're part of other hospitals, institutions, so you may be directly or indirectly targeted. But there's one other type of targeting which is equally important, and that's the fact that we are all targets of opportunity. You may simply find that because we are using Gmail or Hotmail, or because we are on a network where your credentials or your username has been identified, that you are targeted as a matter of convenience. And after the fact, hackers realize that they found themselves on a health system, perhaps a shared health system. So sometimes it's the fact that clinics are targeted, but equally it's the fact that a clinic may get caught up in some of those other types of networks or simply be opportunistically attacked. And ultimately the end result is the same.
Excellent point. I think we're on the second and last poll question we have for everybody here. And that is, have you ever reused a password or shared a password with a colleague or an administrator in your office? Perhaps somebody that's renewing a license or setting up accounts with professional organizations, those sort of admin type support. So if you could just pop in your answer to that, that would be really helpful. And we'll take a look at that data in about 30 seconds.
And as you're doing this, just think about times where you've had your clinic team, your staff help you renew your privileges for that year, or set up your clinic so that you can go into the next room and be ready. Pulled up the test results for you. They've pulled up your EMR. They've got it all set up. Did you ever share a password to allow them to have that access to be able to make things more efficient? So we're just going to end the poll now and I'll share the results.
All right, so about just over half. I answered yes to that question. I don't anymore, certainly, but it's certainly a common occurrence when we're dealing with a lot of logins and sort of shared resources. And we definitely want to emphasize about not doing that. So we'll move to the next slide there, Cindy. And this is the one that says that, you know, we are the weakest link, individuals, and we are the strongest defense. So we are the most important firewall in a healthcare organization. Each individual's knowledge and how they behave individually really does matter. So it is certainly an important point when we look at the strength of our human firewall. So if you can flip to the next one as well. A well-prepared and alert line of human defense is critical to protect patients, clinics, and ourselves against cyber attacks.
So just as an example, we wanted to share with you, here's an email you may see come into your inbox on any day, any time of the day. Your staff would get it, you would get it, get it at your home, because these emails, these phishes, these attacks on us don't just aren't confined to the boundaries of your clinic. They follow us home, right? So take a look at this really quickly and see, what would you look for? Where would you look to see, is there something wrong with this? Is this legit? Is it okay for me to look at this further? I'm going to give you about 5 seconds just to take a quick peek, and then we're going to look at it in a little bit more depth. So we're going to just throw up. When you're looking at emails, are you looking to see the sender? Do you know that person? Do you trust them? Is that their actual email? I know a lot of times I get an email and it's just the person's name and I don't actually see their email address. So I need to hover, or I need to click into it to see what is that email address and look at that. Does it actually say the email address that you're expecting, or is it a kind of an obscure form of that email? And then another one for us is those alerts on your email. So many times we just glaze over them and we quickly, because we're busy, right? Or healthcare professionals, we're going about our busy day, we have a million things to do, but do we glaze over them, or do we actually take a moment to look, hey, there's an alert there. What does that mean? And do we hover on the links to say, what is this legitimate? Is this okay? Am I going to click on this, or should I take a minute and just take a pause, hover over it, and see what's there? As you can see in this one, there's it says, you know, your URL, and it says notifier service, and it is not the legit link to that email. So take a minute, pause, make sure your staff take a minute and pause before you're going through. Maybe it's your inventory request. Maybe it's you know, some of your financial accounting pieces within your clinic. Maybe it's something about PPE, which is so timely right now with COVID, right? Take that minute and do that extra pause. Before you click on a link or a picture of any kind, again, hover over top and see, where does it point to? Is it pointing to where you think it's going to be pointing to, or is it somewhere completely different? So every link, every picture within that email. So right here, this fish alone has, you know, 6 different things that you need to stop and pay attention to before you move on. And maybe you caught a couple of those, or maybe you caught none of them, or maybe your staff were just so quickly busy and that curiosity said, oh, what did Trudeau do next? Let's check it out, right? And they clicked on it inadvertently before. So it's about really making sure that all of our staff are aware of where those risks are and how to mitigate them. Aaron?
All right. Aaron,
Yeah,
did you have
I
anything
did want
to add?
to add to that. I think that what you showed there, Cindy and team, that's so relevant. It's we can't depend on our filters to do the job for us. You know, our Microsoft and Google filters, they get rid of the 95% of the spam. The stuff that's getting through is more sophisticated. We've had so many organizations who are dealing with the ransomware breach because of that one thing that came through. So those techniques are helpful, and we can't trust technology. That human aspect of things is so important. I just wanted to emphasize that resonated with me too.
Excellent. And just further to that point, Aaron and Cindy, so what are the strategies? Well, the very first one is training our teams so that they have the knowledge and the approach to mitigate their risks, to be diligent. Ongoing organization-wide education and awareness is really critical, and it's tough in the healthcare environment. I certainly know that firsthand. It's a challenging place to work, and we're adding another layer for sure. But the principles are sound. They're not too complex once that base knowledge is there. It's a matter about keeping it up top of mind as your staff come into the office, and actually as they head home too, because that risk follows them everywhere they're engaging with technology. An up-to-date understanding on how to prevent breaches and knowledge about how attacks are being done and the latest technologies that are being used are really key. And secondly, there we go, sound policies and procedures. Strong approach and what our standards are within the clinic environment. You know, when you're updating an operating system, bringing in a new element of technology, what are the requirements that you have to ensure that the best process and practice is in place that hasn't increased your risk? In fact, hopefully it's decreased your risk. There's defined steps to take if a breach does occur. Immediate response when a breach happens makes a huge difference on the amount of damage that happens in a clinic environment. And then, go ahead, Aaron. Are you okay? Okay. And then, of course, strong technology. And this is where Aaron would come in, absolutely. Firewalls, a very robust IT infrastructure and architecture. It's not a home job or sort of a hobby IT individual's role. You really do need to bring the experts in here. We know there's competing priorities that directly impact on services for patients and communities. But the risk of not dealing with these issues and nailing it and tightening down the hatches is quite significant. We're learning from other sectors. Of course, healthcare wasn't the first one attacked, and maybe Aaron will speak a little bit more about that in a bit, but we can prevent not all attacks, but many of them. And we want to really put in that layered security where we're talking about people, we're talking about technology and our processes. So we all have a role to play. We're raising awareness. Part of Sages's mandate is to bring this conversation into the clinics and into your teams. We're wanting to really work towards developing really some best practices that become innate and part of our nature, and that we maintain an up-to-date knowledge about what's happening in the field, what the risks are, and where we're going forward. So if I go to the next slide, I think, Cindy. I'm going to let you take over here. There you go.
Yeah, for sure. And so we just wanted to share a few cyber safe habits. And I know that you guys have received some communication from the SMA with some free courses that we had offered at the beginning of COVID, just because we really recognized the need to move quickly into the virtual space for those that hadn't already been practicing in that environment, in that digital care environment, and that strong, quick movement necessitated some really strong, safe cyber habits. So we created a few courses to help give you guys that foundation, and we'd like to share a few of those tips to remind you of them. And they are still available, so that you'll be able to go back in after this session and engage in them yourselves with your team. And so a couple of the top 3 cyber safe habits for remote care, virtual care, is to think about, do log on better. And when we talk about that, what does that actually mean, right? So it's use your best security options. Use that multi-factor authentication. Make sure you're going from secure sites. Make sure that you're using secure emails. You're not using that free Gmail or that free Hotmail account because it's so convenient, but it's not secure. So really think about, how do you log on in a secure and safe way to protect yourself, your clinic, and your patients. Use those strong passwords and those unique phrases for every account, and from your home to your work to your kids to your spouses, because they all have an impact on your clinic and your computer systems. Use a password manager. Consider picking one of the password managers to help you keep track, so you don't have to remember all those passwords that are so complicated and take that time. That they're a really great tool to help you move through your day in a seamless way. And then do connect with care. So, really, sorry. Sorry. And so, when we're talking about connecting with care, this is so relevant right now as we're talking about virtual care, using VPNs and remote access. And, are you using your free Wi-Fi at home? Is other people accessing that network as we're working from home environments right now? So really think about when you're connecting and where you're connecting from and how you're sharing that information. And again, don't get out of date. Do those updates on your phone, on your computer, and always back up your files. And we see it all the time. Do you have a backup in place? Yes, we do. Have you tested it? No, I haven't. So then when you go to test it and it's not working. So really make sure that you understand how your files are being backed up, and test it regularly to make sure that you can recover any information that you would lose if a system was attacked and you were locked out. And then when we looked at that phishing example earlier, we looked at, what are some of the things to think about, and what are some of those tips to share with your team to make sure that as they go about their busy day, what are some of those things to make sure you really protect yourself and your clinic from risk? And so don't click on those links and attachments from people that you don't know, or unsolicited emails. Be really wary about email attachments. Make sure you're expecting them. Make sure that when you hover over them, that everything looks legit. Don't reveal personal financial information in your emails, especially free emails where you don't have the security layers, and they're trolling you. They're watching you for information. Because have you ever got that ad that pops up right after you sent an email about something? So be really cautious about that, and be cautious about verifying your sender, making sure that you're expecting that email. And don't assume that your provider handles all your cybersecurity for you. So your EMRs, your cloud providers, we hear this time and time again that I don't have any risk because my EMR accepts that. And Aaron can speak to this. I see him nodding in the background there. And this is something that we come across all the time. So yes, they have really secure environments, but there still is a risk. And again, when those cyber criminals are looking for a way in, it's really easy to get in through your team and your infrastructure versus maybe the more secure EMR. And I think Aaron has something to add here, and I'd welcome his input.
I want to echo that. Like you've got a bit of a double whammy in clinical environments and in smaller environments, because while the one hand, the kind of technology infrastructure that we use, it sometimes looks like a small business or a small home office type of infrastructure. But the fact is that the expectation, especially if you are talking about the due diligence that is necessary to demonstrate with regards to effective cybersecurity and privacy controls, the expectation is high. A privacy commissioner or regulatory authority expects that clinicians and healthcare practitioners have put into place really robust preventative and detective safeguards across people, process, and technology. So it's hard for small clinics to kind of rationalize, how do I make sure that my IT provider is doing best of breed stuff along with making things cost effective? But we can't outsource that risk. We can't outsource the responsibility of making sure that systems are protected. And of course, today, when risk is hard to distinguish because so many of us are in the cloud, even a lot of clinics now have EMRs that aren't hosted sitting under our desk, they're in the cloud. So we also have to ask ourselves these questions: do my providers have appropriate controls for services that they're selling me, not just necessarily technology? So there is some nuance around this, and defending against malware attacks means pushing back on some of your IT providers and partners to ask them the same questions. Tell me, what are you doing to protect your own systems against an attack that could impact me? There's more than one way to look at this fairly important issue.
And I think for me, one of the things when we've been talking in the past, Aaron, was, if you get that phishing email and your staff inadvertently clicks on it, it's opening that door. They have a direct path into your systems undetected in many occasions, right? So then they're walking through. You've just opened the gates to them. So it's something to consider. All right. So Leanne, I think I'm going to turn the screen share over to you so that you can talk a little bit more about the cybersecurity.
Yeah, hold on to that screen for just 1 second, then I'll share my browser. I just going to take a couple of minutes to let you take a look at Sageshield. It's a brand new platform that really addresses the unique needs of really the clinical space, whether it be clinics, both small and large, as well as hospitals. It provides training that is healthcare centric for cyber security as well as privacy. There's a privacy officer curriculum and ongoing engagement as well, so it helps really to support healthcare teams to meet their obligations and to develop that base of knowledge that makes them a really strong component in that human firewall chain. It allows, with the dashboard, and I'll show you that, the ability to stay vigilant about what's happening in the environment, where are the risks right now. And then we have a bank, I guess we'll call it, of policies and procedures, templates that really set a foundation for you to work towards making sure you have those binders in place, both virtual and in physical, that help guide your teams to go forward. So I'm just going to close this out. So I think I can share my screen just with this one button. So I think you've got this. So do you see the Sageshield on here now?
No. Just see the participants.
All right, let me see what I have done. So you're not seeing my screen at all right now?
No. If you're trying to screen share, I would have thought that it would have automatically given you that privilege, but it doesn't look like it's happening.
Yeah, let me try this again. I'll try it one more time and see if we can.
Oh, there we go. That's working.
All right, that's good news. So basically, this is our login platform. So the Sageshield is an annual subscription. It provides a full, complete curriculum for staff and includes everybody that's on the team who touches any of the technology in your clinics. We, as I mentioned, have 3 components. One would be our courses, which are, I'd encourage you to go into the COVID courses. You'll see the links for. They're done in the very same style, actually on the same platform. It'll look different than this because this is our actual Shield product, but you'll be able to see the engagement and the type of format. We have learning objectives for every module. We're pursuing accreditation at this point for both accreditation bodies in Canada, and we'll have information on that in the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks. The curriculum was developed with a scientific planning committee as well as our subject matter experts, which of course Aaron is our lead on that, and we've really worked to make it relevant and timely in terms of the information that your teams will need to stay safe. We also have this dashboard here, which I'm going to click on just to show you a glimpse of what this looks like. This is an at a glance. We have an environmental threat that is updated as the environment changes, as the number of breaches that are occurring in healthcare, as well as some of the other specters, the bigger landscape. As Aaron mentioned, sometimes there's overflow, and we got caught up in attacks just by virtue and nature of what's happening in that environment. We have a dashboard gauge here, which is an individual's preparation and development as they gain knowledge and information. So that gauge is actually informed by a very robust intake survey where we're evaluating perceptions and knowledge, habits, and then we do a post as well. So really able to measure the impact of this type of training and platform on your team's readiness. They earn shields and phishing shields as we push through phishing challenges. Really important to keep that material top of mind as they're working in their busy clinic environments. It's a brief few minutes, but it really sets that bar at a level that they can maintain current and awareness around what they're trying to accomplish. We have the RSS feed here, which is basically what's happening in Canada in the news around cybersecurity and around privacy issues. What's happening in terms of types of breaches that are making the news, and we'll also be populating that with some articles as they come around as well that are relevant. So a one-stop shop to be able to pull in some of that relevant data. And then you'll see on the bottom right, there's my breaches, and this is, we were talking earlier about if you reuse your password, how vulnerable you are. Well, one of the reasons is when breaches occur on services that you are registered with. Myself personally was caught up in the Adobe breach and the Dropbox breach. This is not my profile, but I had that on my list. And this is really where that data, that list of user IDs and passwords, login information, sometimes much more information is held for sale on the dark web. And that is what's used to populate those credential stuffing and other types of attacks. So this is just really an at-a-glance dashboard. And then we mentioned earlier around resources for policies and procedures that you would have. This is a digital repository. It will be evolving. We'll be adding to it. And they're really the templates to get your team making sure they're meeting the regulatory requirements. We will be adding a Q&A, much like you're going to experience right now, where you can ask the expert going forward, where we'll have some podcasts with hosts such as Aaron holding the mic, where you can really get in and expand on some of your questions and gain some further information as you just try to keep your team and yourself safe from experiencing a significant breach for yourselves as well as your patients. So I'll turn it over, I think, Andrew, to you if you want to head off the Q&A.
Sure. Thank you, Leanne. So I didn't see any questions come up in the chats. I know that we had a couple that were submitted in advance, so maybe we could tackle as well. But there's, if anyone has questions just off the hop, maybe we can go to that first. So if anybody wants to start, please go ahead. I think we have the right number of participants that if you wanted to just unmute and ask a question, you can fire away. And either way, and I'll have a look at the other questions that were submitted.
And so while we're waiting, maybe I'll just share a little bit as well. I mean, one of the things that we hear all the time is the issues around this is kind of twofold around awareness, because one is we did a bunch of research, market research. We talked to clinics across the country. We did key informant interviews as well. And as we got talking, people said, yeah, no, I've got cybersecurity covered. I know what I need to do. So we started probing, asking a few questions. And then what really astounded us is people came around to the realization that, oh, I thought I knew what I was talking about here. I thought I knew I had everything covered, and I don't know what I don't know. And I don't have that covered, and I don't have this secure, and I didn't think about that. And so it's really that conversation about what are those basics? What is that foundational piece that you need to know? And then how do you get that knowledge to help prepare your staff? And this is really about engaging your team, making them part of that risk mitigation process and changing their behaviors and really having the whole culture shift so that it's not punitive in nature that somebody clicks on something, shuts their computer and goes away for the weekend and hopes that it's gone when they get back on Monday morning, but that they say, hey, I just clicked on something. I don't know if that was the right thing to do. Come on over, check it out. What do we do about this? And how do we mitigate this risk in a really quick and timely fashion so that we minimize the impact?
Cindy, you know, when, I'm sorry, go ahead. There was a question.
Yeah, sorry. We're building a website for the clinic, and so we kind of want to, attach the forms and be able to have the patients fill that out. Is there like a safe way, I guess, of doing that? Like, we're working with our IT people and stuff as well, which is great. But Dr. Garcia was just kind of wondering how to safely get that done without there being any breaches and stuff like that.
That's a good question. I think first off, Natalie, in terms of what the nature of the form is and what kind of information is going to be in there, I'm going to assume that this might have some identifying information, either the name of an individual, but not necessarily personal health information. Would that be accurate in terms of the kind of information you're looking to collect?
Yeah, so it'd be like questionnaires and new patient intakes kind of. So, I mean, they would have to put their medical history and stuff like that.
I see. So there's an important distinction, of course. I think of three buckets when you talk about how you could collect information from people. The first is it really kind of generic data that is either anonymous or is not sensitive because it's simply not going to release any personal data. The second, of course, is if I had personal information, name, address, billing data, credit card information. And the third is personal health information. The general rule for healthcare organizations is apply the highest watermark. And so if you're doing patient intake and you wanted to work with an IT provider to ensure that you're collecting things securely, I would expect to see the same types of practices that I have in place when I'm using an EMR or an online chart, like a MyChart type service, to be able to connect. And that means that there is a lot of prescriptive guidance that is expected from privacy commissioners and regulators to demonstrate that you've done things really well. Your IT provider, if they're working in the healthcare space, will likely have a really good handle on what that translates to for the engineers. Encryption and authentication and logging, all of those due diligence types aspects. But I would also open the question up to see how it integrates with an EMR, because EMR products themselves may have another thin edge of the wedge. So there's no really easy checklist to be able to look at and say, is this sufficient? In some regions, for example, our neighbors in Alberta, the mandate is that we would conduct something called a privacy impact assessment, and that includes some security considerations whenever I'm creating a new online system that could be storing or processing personal health information. So in your case, when you're dealing with patient intake, the best practice would be that we take a look at what the requirements are from our regulators and from the privacy commissioner. Your IT providers are likely familiar with those in healthcare environments, and they would convert that into a little bit of a technology checklist. And then you as the clinic and your physician would then be in a position to say, yes, we're comfortable with this and we're signing off on it. Sometimes when it's a larger system or when there's a lot of interaction, it's appropriate to do a little bit of a micro assessment. So hospitals and clinic networks, for example, if they were producing what you're talking about, they would either be using an established service that is already been vetted and secured, or they would be on their own doing a bit of a review to ensure that their IT provider has done their job. So it's hard to give you real clarity. I would have to take a look at what the specifics are of the solution and how big it is and where else it has been used. But those are the general steps that we look at. What do the regulators tell us? What does the privacy commissioner want us to do? Has the IT provider demonstrated that they've got a really robust understanding of what the best practices are to meet those types of obligations? And is it appropriate to do a little bit of a third-party review if that's necessitated because of the size or the complexity of the system?
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I want to actually add one other thing, if I may, Natalie, because you were reminding me of that last picture that you showed, Leanne, when you were going into the Sageshield and you were talking about some of the content in there. And you reminded me that one of the things that we actually had to work really hard with Sagis and CMPA was how do we right size some of the guidance for a small clinic so that they can ask and answer some of those general questions, like what is appropriate cybersecurity for my clinic? And some of the guidance in there, along with having templates, is some checklists to say, well, here are some of the things that you really should be ensuring that you've covered off when you're looking at IT within your clinic. So you could also take a look at some of the resources that are available from regulators, from Sagis, to take a look at fundamental questions there too. There are good tools, but it doesn't replace the need to consider the question.
Oh, okay, perfect.
So there was another question, an advanced question that was sent in. The question is, does the CMPA provide legal and financial protection to members in the event of a privacy or security breach of patient health information, or should MDs obtain separate insurance for this?
Yeah, and that's a great question as well. And again, there's a little bit of a gray area there for us. So our standard advice is always to check with the CMPA first. You're always welcome to call and speak to one of the physician advisors. If the breach is around a privacy matter, or then there is liability protection there with the CMPA, and primarily that applies to the legal defense should there be an investigation by the OPC or the college or a civil action. But however, if it's a cybersecurity breach and you need to do notification, you have to pay fines, or there's other costs associated, such as ransomware, that would not be within the purview of the CMPA, and so you would need to seek advice and support elsewhere.
Okay, thanks. Are there any other questions? Just give you another minute to think about it, and then I think we can maybe wrap it up. If no one else has anything, I think we can probably wrap it up for the day. I'd like to thank Leanne and Cindy and Aaron all for coming and for giving this presentation, and they'll be repeating it again tomorrow if you have any colleagues that would like to participate as well. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very
so
much
for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks everyone for coming. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.